Oh, yes. And we are live once again. And I want to thank you, first of all, Vice Mayor Kaplan. We're going to do a little chatting while we let people file into our live right now. But thank you for being here. We're going to talk about some things. We are off schedule for my lives. I typically do them every other Thursday, but I felt it was important, and you felt it was important to discuss some of the recent things that have happened in the city of Oakland's finance committee, and just in general, what's going on with our budget, particularly in the time of this stimulus that we're getting from the federal government. Um, so I'm glad that you're here with us today. You are the longest tenured council member in Oakland, correct, at this point?
At the moment, I am, yes, because City Council Member Larry Reed retired last year, and he was the longest serving member on the council at that time. So now with his departure, I'm the longest still remaining council member. Now, there are those who've served longer than me in the past, including Frank Ogawa, who was the first council member to hold the at-large seat. But yes, I am now the one who's been here the longest, which means I've also been through several budget cycles.
Yeah.
And for the purposes of our discussion this week, what's important about that is that, this year, the city administrator made up a new thing that we've never seen before, which is this claim of their right to change the budget without a vote of council. And so we've spent the past couple months going back and forth with the attorneys and the administration, trying to bring the budget forward to council in an environment where the administration has been making cuts without a public meeting, without a public hearing, without a council vote, which is pretty unprecedented. And part of why I think it's important to have been through several budget cycles to know that this is not how it's supposed to go. Our law in the city of Oakland says the budget is supposed to be adopted at a publicly noticed meeting where the public can hear what the proposal is and can comment on it. And so these changes the administrator made in December, where they cut a bunch of fire stations, where they froze a bunch of evidence technicians, and then we even found out they froze staff in the permit department for no apparent reason, have been really destructive to Oakland. And it's really important both that we fight for what we want in the budget, for the specific things we want to fund, but also now this bigger picture question of adopting the budget in a public process and holding the city to that, to implementing what is approved through that public process.
Yeah, you said a lot there. And I think that is probably the most important thing that has stood out to me, is that these things are happening without public process, and that we were elected to represent constituents who put us in office so that we would represent their voice. And so to engage in these processes without our approval, without our constituents knowing about it, allows the city and different administrators to go into the press and say that all of these things that are happening are because of something that the council did, when it's just not the case. And it also just really obliterates our definition of democracy. And I think that's the most important thing, because it's already a tentative relationship that the public has with their governments because of things like this, where they just cannot trust what's happening because it's so confusing. So can you tell me, how long have you been on council?
Yes, I was elected to the council November 2008 and sworn in January 2009. And then of course, last term I was council president. Now our fabulous colleague, Councilmember Nikki Bass, is council president. But before that, I was. And one of the duties of the council president is to present the city council's budget for consideration. So not only have I been through the budget several times, but last cycle I led the council's effort on the budget. And so we have seen some of these games being played in terms of attempts by the administration not to give the council the full information. Mm-hmm. But this year, after the November elections, it really came to a whole new level of simply claiming no need to go to the council at all for approval to make major changes to the budget. And I want to say how wonderful it is, my council member, Carroll Fife, to get to serve with you. And I think, the fact that the people spoke through their democracy about what kind of representation they want on the council is part of why it's so important that the budget gets to be decided through a public vote.
That's
And
right.
it seems that it was in reaction to the choices of the voters that some people made a decision to try to do budgeting in secret. And that's not how it's supposed to work in a democracy.
So I'm going to ask you, because you're saying it was after the November elections that you're noticing a drastic shift in how budgets are being conducted in the city of Oakland. And you have a lot of experience working with budgets. So you would know, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. Isn't it because of the COVID crisis that the budgets have been taken into the city administrator's office so that we can avoid further damage to our city and to our rainy day fund, our city services? Isn't that the reason and nothing else?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that is what they want people to think. And what's interesting is, I work with lots of different agencies, and it turns out not everybody is having this level of downturn. I also serve as Oakland's representative on the Alameda County Transportation Commission, which controls over $8 billion for street repair and public transit. And the revenue to that agency has not gone down. We've seen that San Francisco has a surplus, and that other cities around us are not having this type of cut. And so we started digging into the numbers in Oakland. Why is it that the Oakland administration is saying the numbers are so bad? And it turns out very little of the decline is from COVID-related cuts. There was some reduced expenditures in hotels and things like that, but our sales tax is not down. And in fact, it turns out that most of the budget gap was caused by overspending. And so while there is a slight reduction in revenue, the excess overspending is actually far larger than the loss in revenue. And the overspending actually, it turns out, is worse than we thought the last time we talked, because the last time we talked, it was projected at 32 million.
Correct.
And at our finance committee meeting on Monday, we found out they overspent by more than the amount they listed in the last report. So not only are they overspending, since they put out that report in December, in which there was acknowledged some of the overspending, they've continued to overspend even more. And so that's a new piece that we've continued to learn about. And there's another piece that we really dug into in the last 2 weeks, which is the choice of the administration to freeze a bunch of positions of the staff who process permits and inspections that allow businesses to open and housing to be built. And the city council, we had this on our March 2nd agenda, but we have been complaining about this for months. People throughout our community have been complaining for months that they can't get a permit. Nobody returns their calls. Nobody answers the phone. People trying to build an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, on their house can't get through to get a permit. For every person that happens to, that's one less housing unit that we don't have to house people. Or in some cases, it might be 100 less housing units, depending on the project that can't get its permits. For each business that can't open, that's jobs we don't have, and that's tax revenue that we don't have. So now we're short millions of dollars from businesses that would have been open, from housing that would have been built, and we've shortchanged people on jobs, housing opportunity, and business opportunity. And we brought that to the council at the last meeting, and the administrator said they mistakenly froze those positions. So we have now been facing months of frustrating people, annoying people, and undermining the economic recovery of our community at a time when our community desperately needs economic recovery. And the administrator saying it was by mistake, which is pretty horrifying. And that's a mistake that's cost us millions and millions of dollars.
So that is disheartening. That is disheartening. We have a question. So I'm going to take questions throughout this conversation just because I want to involve people, as I know you do, as much as possible in knowing what's happening. So we have a question from Fee Tran that says, what are the legal mechanisms for council to hold the administration accountable to our legal process? Can you help us understand that? Can you help the community understand that a little bit better?
Yes, I think that the question of our legal powers is one of the main things that has been a part of this fight. And I do think that there will be a question of the council needing to bring in legal support on this, because unfortunately, the city attorney works also for the administrator. And so, therefore, when the administrator is the one breaking the law, they have been going along with that, and there has not been providing independent legal support to protect the rights of the public from these secret budget decisions. And so I do think the council is going to need further legal support that works for the council and protects the public's interest in this public process, because we haven't had that in terms of the structure of our system. And just Monday at the Finance Committee, we asked the attorney publicly, who's been defending the administrator's power to secretly cut the budget and has been pretending it's legal. And we asked a very simple question. When a council member wants to propose a list of cuts to the budget, we have to send that list to the lawyers and they have to check through it. And they can tell us, you can't cut this and you can't cut that, because some of the positions in the city are required by a ballot measure that passed, like the police commission ballot measure requires an independent inspector general, so you can't cut that. We have other positions that are required by court decrees where we've been in a legal case and a court will order the city to do a specific thing. And so then it would be illegal for us to cut a position that's related to a court decree. So I asked the attorney, well, when the administrator makes cuts without a public meeting, were those cuts sent to the lawyers to review to make sure they're not cutting anything that we can't legally cut? And they said, no, there was no such process. And so things ended up on that list that are illegal to cut, even if they had gone through a public process. And so we're really in a dangerous situation where Oakland could be punished for breaking the law for cutting positions that are subject to a court decree because the administrator cut them with no process.
So these seem like really strong infractions, very serious infractions. Why would this be happening? What would be the motivation of the administration? Is it, do you think it's ignorance? Do you think it's just why do you think these things are happening right now?
Well, I do think this is a core democracy problem. And if you look at some of these Republican-controlled states where they didn't like the way the votes turned out, that their response of the Republicans is to try to take away the right to vote. And so, if they're taking away the right to decide the budget at a public meeting, they're taking away the public's right to vote, because you're voting for your council members to decide the budget at a public meeting. And so one of the questions this raises is the question that we just got from one of our participants. Thank you so much. How do you even know when the administration is making changes? And so there was a memo that the administrator put out in December listing a bunch of changes that they'd made. And I have asked the attorneys and the finance team, where do those changes get posted? How are they tracked? Some of the ones he said he was made, he then later said he changed his mind. And they said, oh, well, we don't really have a tracking system, which is further proof that this is not a normal way of doing business. Because if this was something in our laws, there would be a tracking system for it. But I did want to make sure not only to talk about the depressing things, but I do want to make sure to also touch on, because the point here is not to give up, but rather, so let me make sure to touch on the opportunity, which is that at our coming Tuesday council meeting, which is coming up the 16th at 1 p.m., we will be talking about what we want to see in the coming budget amendments. And so a discussion of that topic is on our agenda. And I have submitted into the packet, which will come out Friday morning, a set of proposals of what I think we should do with the money that we found. So we have two sources of new money. We have the $10 million that I successfully obtained from the Oakland Coliseum because we won our lawsuit with the Warriors. And we also have the new federal assistance money that passed this week. Thank you, Stacey Abrams, thank you, Georgia, that there were the votes in the Senate to pass something. And so we have an opportunity to use some of these new funds to save some of these vital public services. And so I'm proposing that we restore fully our fire department services, that nobody should have to wait, whether it's for a heart attack or for a fire. Extra minutes means lives lost. So we need all of our fire stations to be open. We're fighting to restore vital public services, including our evidence technicians. These are civilians who work processing evidence. Those positions were frozen. They also froze Ceasefire, which is a program that is aimed at preventing the spiral of gun violence. And then we also have, the basic nuts and bolts of running a city, maintaining the streets, keeping the trash off the streets, housing the homeless, funding these core vital services. And so in our proposal, in terms of what we should do with these funds we found, we're proposing to restore some of these core needs that really help protect people's lives and the health of our community.
Thank you for adding what we want to see in our city versus what's not happening. And I think that's so important to keep people's eye on the prize. Like, we have an opportunity here with this new revenue that you just mentioned to get us on course and make sure that we're funding the things that we need in terms of our essential services, so that service delivery doesn't decrease, as well as the things that we want to see in our communities. And there's a question here a little bit about that. How will new COVID relief funding affect our budget and public budget process? So how will, Vice Mayor Kaplan, this COVID relief funding affect our budget? Will we still be in the hole? Will we be, as the city is projecting, in a deficit for the next several years? How will this relief actually impact us?
Well, first of all, I want to say that we do not have to be in a hole. And if you only do what you've always done, then you'll only get what you've always got. And,
why don't you say that again? Why don't you say that again?
You only do what you've always done, then you'll only get what you've always got. And this attitude of cutting workers as if it doesn't have an impact. The workers that were cut were generating revenue. We have less revenue because those workers were cut. And now the council voted, as I urged, to put back the workers who do the permits and the inspections so that we can build housing and open businesses. So we can make choices that make next year's budget better. We don't just have to accept their statement that it's going to be bad. Second of all, yes, the amount of money we're about to get from the federal government is very, very significant and will do a very substantial job of improving our budget situation, assuming that we make sure that it's budgeted properly. And so, one of the proposals that the administration was trying to get the council to do would let them then spend this new federal money without public approval, without a public process. And we cannot keep repeating these same mistakes. We have to stop repeating the same mistakes and not allow the money to be spent without a public process, without a vote of approval, without notice to the public and a chance for the public to be heard before a decision is made. And so one of the things I'm committing to, and I'm asking our colleagues on, nice comment, I'm asking our colleagues to direct on Tuesday, is that the new funds should be handled properly through a public process and a public vote. And we should absolutely not use all the money right away. We should use what we need to use now to close those gaps and provide those vital services that we need to provide right now and close those identified gaps. But we should save most of the money for the next 2 years, because we're right at the beginning now of about to begin a process to deliberate on the budget for the next 2 years. That starts, by the way, July 1st, right? So when we talk about a year in budgeting, it's what they call a fiscal year, which means July 1st to June 30th. So the process to look at the numbers for the year that starts July 1st and make decisions about where that money is going to go for the next 2 years is going to be going on for the next 2 months. So most of that new federal money should be reserved to be deliberated in that process, because that's how we have democracy and transparency and public participation.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So thank you for clarifying the difference between a calendar year and a fiscal year, because it took me well into adulthood to even know the difference between the two, in my 20s. So I want to say that for the folks who may not know. I also want to shout out one of the comments that I saw in the chat earlier, which is coming from Nicole Dean. Where was that quote? It said, if you want something you've never had, you got to do something you never did. So that is in direct alignment with what you just said, Vice Mayor Kaplan. But there was also a question just about the process that I saw a little earlier. It asked if is there a policy change that the council needs to make via the charter? Is that something that we need to do moving forward? Meaning, will it have to go to the ballot?
Yes. Yes, and actually one of the things I am proposing that we would do is bring on some assistance to help the council with ballot measure analysis so that we can have the right ballot measure that we could put on the ballot. And I believe we need to go back to the ballot for two reasons. We need to go back to the ballot for revenue, to put measures on the ballot to improve our revenue. And we need to go back to the ballot to strengthen the clarity of our laws in terms of requiring that public budget process so that any ambiguity in the laws can't be abused. I absolutely do believe, and this is part of what we've started working on, need to include in the ballot measure, not only to bring in more money, but also to amend our laws so that it is absolutely clear that budget changes have to be made through a public process and a public vote.
Absolutely. And I see the questions just pouring in here. And so I want to make sure that we're getting some of these. I have a comment here from Ann Jane that says, I'm concerned about the power of the city administrator to override, ignore, or go around the city council on budgeting and cuts. How do we rein that in and give power back to the city council, the people whom we voted for? I think that's exactly what Council Member and Vice Mayor Kaplan just stated. We may have to go back and strengthen the clarity of our laws through a ballot measure. We may have to create, and Council Member Kaplan, please correct me if I'm wrong, we may need to change or update our consolidated fiscal policy. I'm not sure if that was dropped in the chat, but that is an ordinance, correct? Passed by the City Council?
Yes, that is an ordinance passed by City Council. And let's see, can I put that in the chat? Oh, it's in the private chat. I don't know if that can be copied over.
We'll get that dropped in there.
All right.
Yes, if we could have that dropped in the chat. The Consolidated Fiscal Policy is the document that governs how we deal with not just our budget, but also our rainy day fund. And can you talk a little bit about the two different funds that we use in case there's an emergency in the city of Oakland?
Yes, absolutely. And just before I go to that, I do want to make sure that in terms of that other question about taking action to put pressure on this, I absolutely think we do need to amend our consolidated fiscal policy. That's an ordinance that we can write and rewrite, and that's the link that I just pasted, but I'm not sure if it came up. And then on top of that, I think we do need a ballot measure, but I wanted to make sure not to neglect another piece of how we have impact, which is through community organizing. And since I am on the Zoom with one of Oakland's foremost community organizers, my Councilmember Carroll Fife, I wanted to not skip over that as part of a strategy of accountability and how we bring that kind of pressure. And in fact, when the administration announced their list of cuts, the level of public pushback about the fire stations was so strong that they did somewhat dial back their fire station cuts. And so in addition to doing the legal strategies and legislative strategies, I think community pressure and community organizing need to also be on the table in terms of helping to put that pressure.
You know, I completely believe that. I mean, I wouldn't be in office without community organizing. It is the lifeblood of what we do, especially when you're trying to imagine new systems that actually keep people safe, that care for our communities. You can't do it any other way. So I firmly believe in grassroots, bottom-up organizing in order to get the changes that we need. So thank you for adding that. We have a question from Jen that's asking, can we keep that money? I assume, Jen, you mean the stimulus money, from being eaten up by OPD overspending. Council member Vice Mayor Kaplan, that is an age-old question that I've, asked. My community organizations, activists have asked. Can you tell us why this keeps happening? Why is there and now it's more, $30 million of overspending in the police department, and how do we get a handle on that?
Absolutely. So it's not a new problem, but it has been getting dramatically worse recently. So it's not that there's never been overspending before. There has been overspending before. Some of us have been raising this and expressing concern about it for several years now. But I also want to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of what happened this year. In typical years in the past, the overspending would be between $12 and $14 million. And this year it was $32 million and climbing. And so, I do think that it's gotten more and more out of control because there has been a sense that there are no controls because the folks at the top are okay with that. And so that's part of why, though, in terms of the what can we do practically moving forward, as we are preparing Tuesday to debate what to do with these new federal funds, I am proposing that we explicitly require that none of them can be expended without specific council authorization, and that they would be held in a special account and not given over to the general account until they're allocated to specific things. And one other piece of that actually overlaps with a previous question about the reserves. So we have a policy in the consolidated fiscal policy. One of the rules is to have a general purpose fund reserve. And the general purpose fund reserve is section 2 of the consolidated fiscal policy. And it says that 7.5% of the general fund must be put in reserves, and that those reserves can only be used to fund unusual, unanticipated, and insurmountable hardship upon a declaration of the council. And so that's what it says in our consolidated fiscal policy. And yet it appears from the report we got at Finance on Monday that the administration has spent a chunk of the reserve, even though there was no such vote of council to approve using the reserve. And so that is one of the questions that I have put to the city attorney and will be following up on at our meeting Tuesday. And that's part of why I have made a specific proposal for our Tuesday budget discussion, that the reserves should be held in a separate account. The administration currently keeps the 7.5% reserve in the same account as the rest of the general purpose fund. So I think they should have to keep it in a separate account that cannot be accessed without a separate authorization, because in this case, it appears they spent it without authorization. And I see we have a wonderful new suggestion from someone on the line here with us.
Why don't you go ahead and read that suggestion?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have a great suggestion. I love the idea from the Reimagining Public Safety Council of an auditor whose job it is to monitor the OPD budget and really see where and how they are spending their money so that there is increased accountability. I think that is an excellent point, that budget needs to be watched by somebody who isn't part of it, by somebody independent who can ensure that they're complying with the budget as they are supposed to.
That is a great suggestion. And I'm seeing that there's this person, I don't know if you know this person, Julie Wedge. Rebecca, you proposed that 2 years ago in the 2019-2021 budget as well. It was not adopted then, and I hope it is included this time. What specifically is Miss Julie Wedge talking about here?
Thank you, Julie Wedge. Hi, great to see you.
Hey, Julie.
Julie Wedge worked with me on the budget 2 years ago when we proposed caps and control protocols over the police overspending. And at the time, it was a previous council. It was before Carroll Fife was on the council. And there were not the votes on council to include those controls. And so absolutely, we will bring that back this time and fight for that again. And thank you for that. And by the way, if we had been doing that, that was 25 million last year and 32 million this year, right? That's $77 million we would have had there not been the police overspending of these past two cycles. And so, it's quite a lot of money, and it's quite a lot of money, by the way, that is not about keeping us safe, right? And so, we have this situation where we have what you could say is the worst of both worlds. We have somehow simultaneously the most police spending ever and the worst record on responding to violent crime ever at the same time. And so, a big chunk of that is because the police have been being spent on foolish things like sending $2 million worth of police to try to intimidate Cat Brooks from giving a speech. The things they've been spent on tear gassing youth who were having a peaceful demonstration. So we have simultaneously this incredible heavy-handed response and overspending, and yet we still get complaints about lack of response to missing persons or lack of response to armed robberies. And so it's not keeping us safe, but it is blowing through the budget unaccountably.
So I think that's a great point, because a lot of what you're hearing in the community, a lot of what I'm hearing is that this crime that we're seeing, this uptick in crime, is because of the council's unwillingness to increase the police budgets and the cuts recently that have been made. So I want to get back to that. I want you to just think about that for a second while I address Jen here, Jen Finley, who's saying, wasn't Kristen Schumacher saying that despite what the administration says, we've had a budget surplus for the past 10 years? She doesn't really remember, but she says there were graphs. And there were graphs, Jen. And so what Kristen was explaining to us in the last budget presentation that we did in my live, was that last week? I think it was last week, was that the way that the budget projections are done, there's always, there's excess that we have in the different funds, in our general purpose fund. And there's also other funds as well, where there are, there's more money in it than there is a deficit. But, that's not reflected in some of the projections and the narrative that we're hearing from the administration. Do you know why that is, Vice Mayor Kaplan? Why the projections are done in the way that they are?
Historically, this administration has underprojected the revenue, and many of us believe that was so they could then spend it on what they wanted to spend it on without it being included in the publicly adopted budget. And so that has been a repeat pattern over many years. Kristen's right about that. And it is a major problem, because what it means is that money also is being decided outside of the public process.
So there's your answer, Jen. I hope that helps. And so just to circle back, you spoke a little bit about the rules requests or some of the things that are happening. I want to touch on, because you have some information that you put in. You have requests that you've made to the administration about certain budget line items. Could you speak more about what you are trying to bring to the public's attention with the requests that you've made of the administration?
Yeah, thank you so much. So on our agenda at the Tuesday meeting, we will be discussing the budget ideas and crafting an action item, which then will come back at a subsequent meeting. And that's because they did not provide in time for today's scheduling the action item that we've been requesting for 2.5 months to allow the council to determine the budget. However, let me be clear, some of the specific things that we have before us, which is that we do have these new funds, both the funds we found from the Coliseum and the new federal funds. And so we don't have to just give up on our city, and we don't have to just give up on our recovery. Whether or not we will have a just recovery from the pandemic, from the economic downturn, from the devastating racial inequities, both those that existed before and those that have been worsened in this pandemic environment. Whether or not we will have a just and effective recovery depends on what we do. And we can choose to use our budget to take action, to restore these vital positions that provide for the public needs, to fund, for example, our youth summer jobs program that, in some years in Oakland has done a great job of helping people have access to economic opportunity, but that in recent years has lagged. We need to support that program. We need to support getting trash off the streets, and we need to support housing the homeless. And speaking of money that we do or don't have, here's another miracle. The federal government, FEMA, has said that they will reimburse us 100% for putting the homeless up in hotel rooms. And we've got, meanwhile, hotels with vacant rooms, lots and lots of vacant hotel rooms right now. And we could be putting people up in hotel rooms and then getting paid back 100% by the federal government. And that's not part of the new assistance money. That's on top of the new assistance money. And so that's something I've been asking the administration to do formally, publicly since last March. And in the budget discussion for Tuesday, one of the specific line items I'm proposing is to give our homelessness administrator a bucket of funds that can be used to put people up in hotels and then submit it for reimbursement, which means we get that money back and then we can spend it on something else. We can continue to improve our community, and for us to push really hard to make sure that as people are trying to build housing and rebuild their businesses, that those permits are timely available, that the staff are answering their questions. And also, let's reopen some of our rec centers. A lot of our recreation centers have been closed. Then our young people don't have a safe place to be. And as people are coming more out of COVID, and as so many in our community are essential workers who have to go to work, we really need those programs for our young people to be supported.
Absolutely. And I really am grateful that you are listing some of the things that you think are critical. And just because on my screen, I'm going to read this statement in this question before I ask the public to weigh in with their vision and their ideas and their comments. I'm going to read this from Kirthi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is there anything we can do as Oakland residents to make sure the administration puts into action the voted on measures to help houseless people? Can you share what was allocated and passed to house/help the houseless, and update for status and how we can help with accountability for these things to happen? Thank you. So the first question is there anything we can do to push the administration into action around the measures that were voted on to help the houseless? Can you speak to that?
Well, hi, Kirthi, and thank you for the question. Yes, so absolutely, that's a great point. The voters of Oakland last March passed a ballot measure that includes funding for the homeless. And that ballot measure is known as Measure Q. And one of the interesting things in the report we got at Finance this week is that it said there were several $1 million of Measure Q funds that have not been spent. And so as we do the work to fight to get to pass the budget in public and to work on what goes in that, we need to keep in mind that those are funds that the voters voted for in order to help the homeless. And so we need to make sure that those funds get allocated and used. And I would add that on March 22nd, we're going to be having a meeting of the Life Enrichment Committee, where we will also be talking again in more detail about the funding plan to help the homeless. And there are 3 specific things that I think the city has not been sufficiently doing that I will be fighting for. One is to do rapid build, deeply affordable housing that is real housing. And I'm not talking about tool sheds. I'm talking about housing that, while it may be fairly inexpensive and quick to build, are real homes with doors and windows and plumbing and electricity that people can live in with dignity and privacy and safety. And that there is a growing market of these rapid build modular housing, and we own public land that we could be building on. I think it's essential that Oakland start working to deploy public land to build significant numbers of rapid build, deeply affordable housing. And then the other piece, which I've already mentioned, the use of the hotels with the FEMA reimbursement. The hotels are empty now. The FEMA reimbursement money is available now. We got to do a better job of using that resource. And then lastly, something the council voted for 2 years ago that hasn't been implemented yet is to create RV parks, regulated RV parks with dump stations and sanitation, so that people with RVs can have a safe place to go and a safe place to dump the sewage that handles that disposal properly, and that all of those need to be components of our homeless response.
Outstanding. So at this moment, because I'm not going to keep my staff on the line too much, I want people to drop in the chat. What is your vision? What are some of the things that you would like to see? This is about organizing. So that means even the people who are coming to the live to participate and share their perspectives and hear from us about what's happening on the inside. What do you want to see in your community? We had dropped in here my budget survey. So that's cool. If you don't want to go through a budget survey and you just want to just tell us right now, please drop your suggestions and your vision in the chat. Vice Mayor Kaplan just listed many things. One is mentioned right here from Tiffany Ang, who's saying, yes, invest in our youth and rec centers. This city is currently applying for Prop 68 state funds right now to fund capital projects. Being able to pledge additional federal funds will make the city's applications more competitive. I urge the city council to look for strategic opportunities like this to invest in. Thank you, Tiffany. We've got to invest in our youth, particularly right now when so many young people are living in Oakland without internet services, without being able to have recess, without all of the things that young people would typically have access to. And we've got to look for outlets for them to recover from being in isolation for over a year now, and to be able to learn and grow and to thrive and come back from the impacts of COVID. So yes, our young people are so critical. And so are the job programs that are essential to some of the young people that I worked with when I was a teacher at the Street Academy. A lot of young people were actually working to lend to their households, to support their households where funds were not that easy to come by. So it's definitely critical. And I see some of these suggestions coming in. Ramondi Park improvements. See that? I got you.
Thank you. And of course, one of our commenters typed in, and I shouldn't let our time conclude without mentioning macro, also on the agenda on Tuesday, so worth a mention. Macro is the vision and strategy and now growing plan in Oakland to provide civilian responders for certain calls, including mental health calls that are not well handled by police, and that other cities have been doing this more and more and have found that it saves money and it saves lives to send appropriate civilian responders for those calls. This is something we've been talking about for some time now in Oakland, and a big thank you to the incredible grassroots advocacy that fought for Oakland to even start down the path of having civilian responders, without which we would not be here. So this is a big testament to the grassroots advocacy that has underpin this, but we are now preparing to vote to ensure that macro is launched as an enduring and in-house program through our fire department. And that is on the agenda Tuesday, as well as the discussion and an opportunity to hear from people about these budget amendments and what you want to see. And so I hope people will come out both to share what specific items you want to see in the budget, but also really to support that it be done through democracy and openness and public meetings.
I gotta say it just because I just saw a comment from Rashida Chase that the last budget cycle that we went through, I was standing next to Rashida Chase in the chambers when we had to shut down the entire council because of the games that were being played at that time. We had arts organizations, we had housing organizations, we had advocates like the Anti-Police Terror Project that was there around transferring some of the funds from OPD into community services that Rashida is talking about, which is more support for cultural arts with diversified funds for more than just visual artists. I think that's important that Oakland is so rich in its art scene, and a lot of those artists that make Oakland such an amazing place to be are struggling right now, and that's because this work is not funded. So I wanted to shout out Rashida. She says, I remember that it was beautiful because we were all there collectively and our voices were not being heard. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people in the council advocating for what we're advocating for right now. I also want to give a shout out to Brooklyn, who's saying she would like to see housing built specifically for transitional age youth. And once again, critical. I work with young people who are living on the streets or in this one shelter that is available for young people. And, we need services for them. We need housing for them. And I think that's a really important point. So thank you, Brooklyn, for sharing that. Fee is saying, would love to see more funding for permanent, sustainable, affordable housing through something like the Land Trust. Once again, that's something that is near and dear to my heart. I'm seeing a theme of housing coming up. And I think that was also a big part of the recent budget survey that we were presented with in City Council last week, that people want to see housing and park improvements, specifically Ramondi Park. So Matthew, we see you. We see that.
And more places to play soccer.
More places to play soccer.
And football, apparently.
Yes. And Julie is adding, Youth Spirit Tiny Home Village is open, correct?
Yep.
I believe so. I saw a lot about that on social media. So yes. And we need more. We need more housing because our model of how we engage with housing right now is completely inverted, and it's not accurate. It does not serve people. So we've got to think big about how we transform that system as well. And so if there are no other things that are pressing on your heart, Vice Mayor Kaplan, I would share that information is so key. In an age where you don't know what's what and you don't know what's real, you can also do your own independent investigation for the truth. We're going to bring you as much as we possibly can. I'm trying to open up this process and make it more transparent so people know what's happening. And I want to say, for the record, I've said it before, that we will be attacked for sharing information with you. I've had maybe 2 or 3 meetings now in the city where I've been told how I should watch what I say, watch what I post on social media, because it can open up myself in the city for litigation and for lawsuits. So I want to say that the typical process is to control information so you all don't know what's happening, so you don't have those tools. And there are more people that are counter to me than are like me. So I want to say that to y'all, because there's a lot of folks out there who talk a good game, but are trying to keep the status quo in place. And I'm trying to completely dismantle those systems and processes for you, for your benefit. And I will say that over and over again, so you know, but you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to come with receipts as much as possible. I'm going to tell you where to look so you can do your own independent investigation, but know that our work is to transform this system and open up the halls of justice and the halls of governance to you. That is my goal. It's not to have this big platform, to do anything else, but to help the people who need it the most. So I just want to say that for the record.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I so appreciate everyone who's joined us and the great comments. Should we put in the chat the link for the Tuesday council meeting? And if you've access to the chat.
Great idea.
But our council meeting is Tuesday, March 16th at 1 p.m. Also, you can find all the council agendas at oakland.legistar.com. If you select the meeting date, you can find the agenda for that meeting and read the items. The Tuesday meeting starts at 1 o'clock. And then March 22nd at 1 o'clock is the Life Enrichment Committee meeting, where we're going to be talking about homeless solutions. But the full council meeting is this coming Tuesday, the 16th. Both will be talking about the budget and about macro. And so I really so appreciate my colleague and the Carroll Fife and the opportunity to have this dialogue, and also to involve the public and to make sure that we're fighting for a budget that provides a just recovery for our community, and for a transparent process that is truly implemented as passed.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It is a pleasure serving with you, Vice Mayor Kaplan. We're going to get some things done, not just in this term, but just in the next few months. We're going to do some things for the people of Oakland. And just because y'all see us in a fight, don't mean we started it, but we are going to finish it. Just so you know that we're fighting for y'all. So I just want to share that. Thank you, Ann. Trying to be as transparent as possible. And if there's something that we didn't share that you want to know, just drop us a line. Just shoot me a text. Come to our lives. There's a bunch of ways you can get in contact with us. Justin Tombolesi, my D3 organizer, Tanya Love, Red. I mean, there's so many of us to get in contact with. Yes, please join us. Let us know how we can serve. That is why we're here. We appreciate you all for tuning in, and have a blessed, blessed evening. Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao.